All right, everyone. Hello. It is time for the final reading of Small Gods. I know I've said that in the past. Let me put on my glasses. But yeah, this is it. We're gonna go through the last 50 pages. So let's do this, and then we can get on to the next book, and you guys can finally hear the thrilling conclusion of this one. Ern and Fergman walked nonchalantly through the tunnels of the Citadel, using the kind of nonchalant walk which, had there been anyone to take an interest in it, would have drawn detailed and arrow-sharp attention to them within seconds. But the only people around were those with vital jobs to do. Besides, it was not a good idea to stare too hard at the guards, in case they stared back. Simony had told Ern he'd agreed to this. He couldn't quite remember doing so. The sergeant knew a way into the Citadel, that was sensible, and Ern knew about hydraulics, fine. Now he was walking through these dry tunnels with his tool belt clinking. There was a logical connection, but it had been made by someone else. Bergman turned a corner and stopped by a large grill which stretched from floor to ceiling. It was very rusty. It might once have been a door. There was a suggestion of hinges rusted into the stone. Ern peered through the bars. Beyond, in the gloom, there were pipes. Eureka, he said. Gonna have a bath then, said Fergman. Just keep watch. Ern selected a short crowbar from his belt and inserted it between the grill and the stonework. Give me a foot of good steel and a wall to brace. My foot against. The grill ground forward and then popped out with a leaden sound. And I can change the world. He stepped inside the long, dark, damp room and gave a whistle of admiration. No one had done any maintenance for as long as it took iron hinges to become a mass of crumbling rust. But all this still worked? He looked up at lead and iron buckets bigger than he was and a tangle of man-sized pipes. This was the breath of God. Probably the last man who knew how it worked had been tortured to death years before, or as soon as it was installed. Killing the creator was a traditional method of patent protection. There were levers, and there, hanging over pits in the rock floor, were the two sets of counterweights. Probably it'd take only a few hundred gallons of water to swing the balance either way. Of course, the water would have to be pumped up. Sergeant? Bergman peered around the door. He looked nervous, like an atheist in a thunderstorm. What? Ern pointed. There's a big shaft through the wall there, see? At the bottom of the gear chain? The what? The big knobbly wheels. Oh, yeah. Where does that shaft go to? Don't know. There's the big treadmill of correction through there. Ah. The breath of God was ultimately the sweat of men. Didactylos would have appreciated the joke, Ern thought. He was aware of a sound that had been there all the time but was only now penetrating through his concentration. It was tinny and faint and full of echoes, but it was voices from the pipes. The sergeant, to judge by his expression, had heard them too. Ern put his ear to the metal. There was no possibility of making out words, but the general religious rhythm was familiar enough. It's just the service going on in the temple, he said, probably resonating off the doors and the sounds being carried down the pipes. Bergman did not look reassured. No gods are involved in any way, Ern translated. He turned his attention to the pipes again. Simple principle, said Ern, more to himself than to Fergman. Water pours into the reservoirs on the weights, disturbing the equilibrium. One lot of weights descends and the other rises from the shafts in the wall. The weight of the door is immaterial. As the bottom weights descend, these buckets here tip over, pouring the water out. Probably quite a smooth action. Perfect equilibrium at either end of the movement, too. Nicely thought out. He caught Fergman's expression. Water goes in and out and the doors swing open, he translated. So all we've got to do is wait for... what did he say the sign would be? They'll blow a trumpet when they're through the main gate, said Fergman, pleased to be of service. All right. Ern eyed the weights in the reservoirs overhead. The bronze pipes dripped with corrosion. But perhaps we'd better just check that we know what we're doing, he said. It probably takes a minute or two before the doors start moving. He fumbled under his robe and produced something that looked, to Fergman's eye, much like a torture instrument. This must have communicated itself to Ern, who said very slowly and kindly, This is an adjustable spanner. Yes? It's for twisting nuts off. Bergman nodded miserably. Yes, he said. Oh, and this is a bottle of penetrating oil. Oh, good. Just give me a leg up, will you? It'll take time to unhook the linkage to the valve, so we might as well make a start. Ern heaved himself onto the ancient machinery while, above, the ceremony droned on. Cut me own hand off de Blois was all for new profits. He was even in favor of the end of the world if we could get the concessions to sell religious statues, cut-price icons, rancid sweetmeats, fermenting dates, and putrescent olives on a stick to any watching crowds. Subsequently, this was his testament. There never was a book of Prophet Brutha, but an enterprising scribe, during what came to be called the renovation, did assemble some notes, and de Blois had this to say. I was standing right by the statue ossuary, right, when I noticed Brutha just beside me. Everyone was keeping away from him because of him being a bishop, and they do things to you if you jostle bishops. 2. I said to him, hello, your graciousness, and offered him a yogurt, practically free. 3. He responded, no. 4. I said, it's very healthy, it's a live yogurt. 5. He said, yes, he could see. 6. He was staring at the doors. This was about the time of the third gong, so we all knew we'd got hours to wait. He was looking a bit down, and it's not as if he even ate the yogurt, which I admit was on the hum a bit, what with the heat. I mean, it was more alive than usual. I mean, I just had to keep hitting it with a spoon to stop it getting out of the... All right, I was just explaining about the yogurt. All right, I mean, you just want to put a bit of color in, don't you? People like a bit of color. It was green. 7. He just stood there staring, so I said, got a problem, your reverence? Upon which he vouchsafed, I cannot hear him. I said, what is it to he whom what you refer? He said, if he was here, he would send me a sign. 8. And there is no truth whatsoever in the rumor that I ran away at this juncture. It was just a pressure of the crowd. I have never been a friend of the Quisition. I might have sold them food, but I always charged them extra. 9. Anyway, right, then he pushed through the line of guards, what was holding the crowd back, and stood right in front of the doors, and they weren't sure what to do about bishops, and I heard him say something like, I carried you in the desert, I believed with all my life, just give me this one thing. 10. Something like that anyway. How about some yogurt? Bargain offer, on a stick. Lifted himself over a creeper-clad wall by grasping tendrils in his beak and hauling himself up by the neck muscles. Then he fell down on the other side. The citadel was as far away as ever. Brutha's mind was flaming like a beacon in Om's senses. There's a streak of madness in everyone who spends quality time with gods, and it was driving the boy now. It's too soon, Om yelled. You need followers. It can't just be you. You can't do it by yourself. You have to get disciples first. Simony turned to look down the length of the turtle. 30 men were crouched under the shell, looking very apprehensive. A corporal saluted. The needle's there, Sergeant. The brass whistle whistled. Simony picked up the steering ropes. This was what war should be, he thought. No uncertainty. Few more turtles like this, and no one would ever fight again. Stand by, he said. He pulled the big lever hard. The brittle metal snapped in his hand. Give anyone a lever long enough and they can change the world. It's unreliable levers that are the problem. In the depths of the temple's hidden plumbing, Ern grasped a bronze pipe firmly with a spanner and gave the nut a cautious turn. It resisted. He changed the position and grunted as he used more pressure. With a sad little metal sound, the pipe twisted and broke. Water gushed out, hitting him in the face. He dropped the tool and tried to block the flow with his fingers, but it spurted around his hands and gurgled down the channel towards one of the weights. Then stop it! Stop it! What? Said Fergman several feet below him. Stop the water! How? The pipe's broken! I thought that's what we wanted to do? Not yet! Stop shouting, mister, there's guards around! Ern let the water gush for a moment as he struggled out of his robe and then rammed the sodden material into the pipe. It shot out again with some force and slapped wetly against the lead funnel, sliding down until it blocked the tube that led to the weights. The water piled up behind it and then spilled over on the floor. Ern glanced at the weight. It hadn't begun to move. He relaxed slightly. Now, provided there was still enough water to make the weight drop. Both of you, stand still. He looked around, his mind going numb. There was a heavy-set man in a black robe standing in the stricken doorway. Behind him, a guard held a sword in a meaningful manner. "Who are you? Why are you here?" Ern hesitated for only a moment. He gestured with his spanner. "Well, it's the seating, innit?" he said. "You've got, shocking seepage around the seating. Amazing, it holds together." The man stepped into the room. He glared uncertainly at Ern for a moment, and then turned his attention to the gushing pipe, and then back to Ern. "But you're not," he began. He spun around as Fergman hit the guard hard with a length of broken pipe. When he turned back, Ern's spanner caught him full in the stomach. Ern wasn't strong, but it was a long spanner, and the well-known principles of leverage did the rest. He doubled up and then sagged backwards against one of the weights. What happened next happened in frozen time. Deacon Cusp grabbed at the weight for support. It sank down ponderously, his extra poundage adding to the weight of the water. He clawed higher. It sank further, dropping below the lip of the pit. He sought for balance again, but this time it was against fresh air, and he tumbled on top of the falling weight. Ern saw his face staring up at it as the weight fell into the gloom. With a lever, he could change the world. It had certainly changed it for Deacon Cusp. It had made it stop existing. Fergman was standing over the guard, his pipe raised. "I know this one," he said. "I'm gonna give him a... Never mind about that." But above them, linkage clanked into action. There was a distant creaking of bronze against bronze. Let's get out of here," said Ern. "Only the gods know what's happening up there." And blows rained on the unmoving turtle's carapace. "Damn, damn, damn," shouted Simony, thumping it again. "Move! I command you to move! Can you understand plain Ephebian? Move!" The unmoving machine leaked steam and sat there. And Ohm pulled himself up the slope of a small hill. So it came to this, then. There was only one way to get to the Citadel now. It was a 1,000,000 to 1 chance, with any luck. And Brutha stood in front of the huge doors, oblivious to the crowd and the muttering guards. The Quisition could arrest anyone, but the guards weren't certain what happened to you if you apprehended an archbishop, especially one so recently favored by the prophet. Just a sign, Brutha thought, in the loneliness of his head. The doors trembled and swung slowly outwards. Brutha stepped forward. He wasn't fully conscious now, not in any coherent way as understood by normal people. Just one part of him was still capable of looking at the statue of his own mind and thinking, or state of his own mind, and thinking, perhaps the great prophets felt like this all the time. The thousands inside the temple were looking around in confusion. The choirs of lesser Eoms paused in their chant. Brutha walked on up the aisle, the only one with a purpose in the suddenly bewildered throng. Vorbis was standing in the center of the temple, under the vault of the dome. Guards hurried towards Brutha, but Vorbis raised a hand in a gentle but very positive movement. Now Brutha could take in the scene. There was the staff of Ossuary, and Abby's cloak, and sandals of Sina, and supporting the dome, the massive statues of the first 4 prophets. He'd never seen them. He'd heard about them every day of his childhood. And what did they mean now? They didn't mean anything. Nothing meant anything. If Vorbis was prophet, nothing meant anything if the Cenobiarch was a man who'd heard nothing in the inner spaces of his own head but his own thoughts. He was aware that Vorbis's gesture had not only halted the guards, although they surrounded him like a hedge, it had also filled the temple with silence, into which Vorbis spoke. "Ah, my Brutha, we had looked for you in vain, and now even you are here." Brutha stopped a few feet away. The moment of whatever it had been that had propelled him through the doors had drained away. Now, all there was Vorbis, smiling. The part of him still capable of thought was thinking, there's nothing you can say. No one will listen. No one will care. It doesn't matter what you tell people about Ephebe and Brother Murdoch in the desert. It won't be fundamentally true. Fundamentally true. That's what the world is, with Vorbis in it. Vorbis said, "There is something wrong, something you wish to say." The black-on-black eyes filled the world like 2 pits. Brutha's mind gave up, and Brutha's body took over. It brought his hand back and raised it, oblivious to the sudden rush forward of the guards. He saw Vorbis turn his cheek and smile. Brutha stopped and lowered his hand. He said, No, I won't. Then, for the first and only time, he saw Vorbis really enraged. There had been times before when the deacon had been angry, but it had been something driven by the brain, switched on and off as the need arose. This was something else, something out of control, and it flashed across the face, only for a moment. As the hands of the guards closed on him, Vorbis stepped forward and patted him on the shoulder. He looked Brutha in the eye for a moment and then said softly, "Thrash him within an inch of his life and burn him the rest of the way." As an Iam began to speak, but stopped when he saw Vorbis's expression. "Do it now." A world of silence. No sound up here except the rush of wind through the feathers. Up here the world is round, bordered by a band of sea. The viewpoint is from horizon to horizon. The sun is closer, and yet looking down, looking for shapes. Down in the farmland on the edge of the wilderness, on a small hill, a tiny moving dome, ridiculously exposed. No sound but the rush of wind through feathers as the eagle pulls in its wings and drops like an arrow. The world spinning around, the little moving shape that is the focus of all the eagle's attention. Closer and talons down, grip and rise. Brutha opened his eyes. His back was merely agonizing. He'd long ago got used to switching off pain. But he was spread-eagled on a surface, his arms and legs chained to something he couldn't see. Sky above, the towering frontage of the temple to one side. By turning his head a little, he could see the silent crowd and the brown metal of the iron turtle. He could smell smoke. Someone was just tightening the shackles over his hand. Brutha looked over at the Inquisitor. Now, what was it he had to say? Oh, yes. "The turtle moves," he mumbled. The man sighed. "Not this one, friend." The world spun under Om as the eagle sought for shell-cracking height, and his mind was besieged by the tortoise's existential dread of being off the ground, and Brutha's thoughts, bright and clear, this close to death. "I'm on my back, and I'm getting hotter, and I'm going to die. Careful, careful, concentrate, concentrate. It'll let go any second." Om stuck out his long, scrawny neck, stared at the body just above him, picked what he had hoped was about the right spot, plunged his beak through the brown feathers between the talons, and gripped. The eagle blinked. No tortoise had ever done that to an eagle, anywhere else in history. Om's thoughts arrived in the little silvery world of its mind. "We don't want to hurt each other now, do we?" The eagle blinked again. Eagles have never evolved much imagination or forethought beyond that necessary to know that a turtle smashes when you drop it on the rocks. But it was forming a mental picture of what happened when you let go of a heavy tortoise that was still intimately gripping an essential bit of you. Its eyes watered. Another thought crept into its mind. "Now, you play ball with me, I'll play ball with you. Understand? This is important. This is what I want you to do." The eagle soared off on a thermal off the hot rocks and sped towards the distant gleam of the citadel. No tortoise had ever done this before. No tortoise in the whole universe, but no tortoise had ever been a god and knew the unwritten motto of the Quisition. Huius testiculos habes, habeas cardia et cerebellum. God, sorry everybody. When you have their full attention in your grip, their hearts and minds will follow. Ern pushed his way through the crowds with Fergman trailing behind. That was the best and the worst of Civil War, at least at the start. Everyone wore the same uniform. It was much easier when you picked enemies who were a different color, or at least spoke with a funny accent. You could call them gooks or something. It made things easier. Hey, Ern thought, this is nearly philosophy. Pity I probably won't live to tell anyone. The big doors were ajar. The crowd was silent and very attentive. He craned forward to see, and then looked up at the soldier beside him. It was Simony. "I thought—" "It didn't work," said Simony bitterly. "Did you? We did everything. Something broke." "Nah, it must be the steel they make here," said Ern. "The link pin's on." "That doesn't matter now," said Simony. The flat tones of his voice made Ern follow the eyes of the crowd. There was another iron turtle there, a proper model of a turtle mounted on a sort of open gridwork of metal bars, in which a couple of Inquisitors were even now lighting a fire, and chained to the back of the turtle. "Who's that?" "Brutha." "What?" "I don't know what happened. He hit Vorbis or didn't hit him or something. Enraged him anyway, Vorbis stopped the ceremony right there and then. Ern glanced at the deacon. Not Cenobiarch yet, so uncrowned. Among the imes and bishops standing uncertainly in the open doorway, his bald head gleamed in the morning light. Come on then, said Ern. Come on what? We can rush the steps and save him. There's more of them than there are of us, said Simony. Well, haven't there always been? There's not magically more of them than there are of us just because they've got Brutha, are there? Simony grabbed his arm. Think logically, will you? He said. You're a philosopher, aren't you? Look at the crowd. Ern looked at the crowd. Well? They don't like it, Simon turned. Look, Brutha's going to die anyway, but this way it'll mean something. People don't understand, really understand about the shape of the universe and all that stuff, but they'll remember what Vorbis did to a man. Right? We can make Brutha's death a symbol for the people, don't you see? Ern stared at the distant figure of Brutha. It was naked, except for a loincloth. A symbol? He said. His throat was dry. It has to be. He remembered Didactylos saying the world was a funny place, and he thought distantly that it really was. Here people were about to roast someone to death, but they'd left his loincloth on out of respectability. You had to laugh, otherwise you'd go mad. You know, he said, turning to Simony, now I know Vorbis is evil. He burned my city. Well, the Sordians do it sometimes, and we burn theirs. It's just war. It's all a part of history, and he lies and cheats and claws power for himself, and lots of people do that too. But you know what's special? You know what it is? Of course, said Simony. It's what he's done to you. What? He turns other people into copies of himself. Simony's grip was like a vice. You're saying I'm like him? Once you said you'd cut him down, said Ern. Now you're thinking like him. So we rush them then, said Simony. I'm sure of maybe 400 on our side, so I give the signal a few hundred of us attack thousands of them, and he dies anyway and we die too. What difference does that make? Ern's face was gray with horror now. You mean you don't know? He said. Some of the crowd looked around curiously at him. You don't know? He said. The sky was blue. The sun wasn't high enough yet to turn it into Omnia's normal copper bowl. Brutha turned his head again towards the sun. It was about a width above the horizon, although if Didactylos' theories about speed of light were correct, it was really setting thousands of years in the future. It was eclipsed by the head of Vorbis. Hot yet, Brutha? Said the deacon. Warm. It will get warmer. There was a disturbance in the crowd. Someone was shouting. Vorbis ignored it. Nothing you want to say, he said. Can't you even manage a curse? Or even a curse? Not even a curse? You never heard Om, said Brutha. You never believed. You never ever heard his voice. All you heard were the echoes inside your own mind. Really? But I am the Cenobiarch, and you are going to burn for treachery and heresy, said Vorbis. So much for Om, perhaps. There will be justice, said Brutha. There is no justice, then there is nothing. He was aware of a small voice in his head, too faint yet to distinguish words. Justice, said Vorbis. The idea seemed to enrage him. He spun around to the crowd of bishops. Did you hear him? There will be justice. Om has judged through me. This is justice. There was a speck in the sun now, speeding towards the citadel, and the little voice was saying, left, 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 up, up, left, right, a bit up, left. The mass of metal under him was getting uncomfortably hot. He comes now, said Brutha. Vorbis waved his hand to the great facade of the temple. Men built this. We built this, he said. And what did Om do? Om comes. Let him come. Let him judge us. Let him judge between us now. He comes now, said Brutha. The god. People looked apprehensively upward. There was that moment, just one moment, when the world holds its breath, and against all experiences waits for a miracle. Up, left, now, and when I say 3, 1, 2, 3! Vorbis, croaked Brutha. What? Snapped the deacon. You're going to die. It was hardly a whisper, but it bounced off the bronze doors and carried across the place. It made people uneasy, although they couldn't quite say why. The eagle sped across the square, so low people ducked. Then it cleared the roof of the temple and curved away towards the mountains. The watchers relaxed. It was only an eagle. For a moment, just for a moment, no one saw the tiny speck tumbling down from the sky. Don't put your faith in gods, but you can believe in turtles. A feeling of rushing wind in Brutha's mind, and a voice, "Oh, bugger, 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 oh, no, bugger, no, 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 arg!" Even Vorbis got a grip on himself. There had been just a moment when he'd seen the eagle, but no. He extended his arms and smiled beatifically at the sky. "I'm sorry," said Brutha. One or two people who had been watching Vorbis closely said later that there was just time for his expression to change before 2 pounds of tortoise, traveling at 3 meters a second, hit him between the eyes. And it was a revelation. And that does something to people watching. For a start, they believe with all their heart. Brutha was aware of feet running up the steps and hands pulling at the chains, and then a voice. He is mine. The great god rose over the temple, billowing and changing as the belief of thousands of people flowed into him. There were shapes there of eagle-headed men and bulls and golden horns, but they tangled and flamed and fused into one another. 4 bolts of fire whirred out of the cloud and burst the chains holding Brutha. 2. He is Cenobiarch and prophet of prophets. The voice of Theophany rumbled off the distant mountains. Do I hear any objections? No? Good. The cloud had by now condensed into a shimmering golden figure as tall as the temple. It leaned down until its face was a few feet away from Brutha, and in a whisper that boomed across the place said, Don't worry, this is just the start. You and me, kid. People are going to find out what wailing and gnashing of teeth really is. Another shaft of flame shot out and struck the temple doors. They slammed shut, and then the white-hot bronze melted, erasing the commandments of the centuries. What shall it be, prophet? Brutha stood up unsteadily. Ern supported him by one arm and Simony by the other. He said muzzily. Your commandments? I thought they were supposed to come from you, said Brutha. I don't know if I can think of any. The world waited. How about think for yourself, said Ern, staring in horrified fascination at the manifestation. No, said Simony. Try something like social cohesiveness is the key to progress. Can't say it rolls off the tongue, said Ern. If I can be any help, said Cut-Me-Own Hand-Off DeBlah from the crowd, something of benefit to the convenience food industry would be welcome. Not killing people. We could do with one like that, said someone else. It'd be a good start, said Ern. They looked at the chosen one. He shook himself free of their grip and stood alone, swaying a little. No, said Brutha. No, I thought like that once, but it would. Not really. Now, he said, only now, just one point in history. Not tomorrow, not next month. It'll always be too late unless it's now. They stared at him. Come on, said Simony. What's wrong with it? You can't argue with it. It's hard to explain, said Brutha. But I think it's got something to do with how people should behave. I think you should do things because they're right, not because the gods say so. They might say something different another time. I like the one about not killing, said Om from far above. It's got a good ring to it. Hurry up, I've got some smiting to do. You see, said Brutha, no smiting, no commandments unless you obey them too. Om thumped the roof of the temple. You order me? Here? Now? Me? No, I ask. That's worse than ordering. Everything works both ways. Om thumped his temple again. A wall caved in. That part of the crowd hadn't managed to stampede from the place redoubled its efforts. There must be punishment, otherwise there will be no order. No! I do not need you. I have believers enough now. But only through me, and perhaps not for long. It'll all happen again. It's happened before. It happens all the time. That's why gods die. They never believe in people, but you have a chance. All you need to do is believe. What? Listen to stupid prayers? Watch over small children? Make it rain? Sometimes, not always. It could be a bargain. Bargain? I don't bargain. Not with humans. Bargain now, said Brutha. Well, you have a chance. Or one day you'll have to bargain with Simony, or someone like him, or Ern, or someone like him. I could destroy you utterly. Yes, I am entirely in your power. I could crush you like an egg. Yes. Ohm paused. Then he said, You can't use weakness as a weapon. It's the only one I've got. Why should I yield then? Not yield, bargain. Deal with me in weakness, or one day you'll have to bargain with someone in a position of strength. The world changes. Ha! You want a constitutional religion? Why not? The other sort didn't work. Ohm leaned on the temple, his temper subsiding. Very well then, but only for a time. A grin spread across the enormous smoking face. For 100 years, yes? And after 100 years, we shall see. Agreed. A finger the length of a tree unfolded, descended, touched Brutha. You have a persuasive way. You will need it. A fleet approaches. Phoebians, said Simony. And Sortians, and Gelabians, and Calachians, every free country along the coast to stamp out Omnia for good or bad. You don't have very many friends, do you? Said Ern. Even I don't like us much, and I am us, said Simony. He looked up at the god. Will you help us? You don't even believe in me. Yeah, but I'm a practical man. And brave, too, to declare atheism before your god. This doesn't change anything, you know, said Simony. Don't think you can get around me by existing. No help, said Brutha firmly. What? Said Simony. We'll need a mighty army against that lot. Yes, and we haven't got one, so we'll do it another way. You're crazy! Brutha's calmness was like a desert. This may be the case. We have to fight. Not yet. Simony clenched his fist in anger. Look, listen! We died for lies. For centuries we died for lies. He waved his hand towards the god. Now we've got a truth to die for. No. Men should die for lies, but the truth is too precious to die for. Simony's mouth opened and shut soundlessly as he sought for words. Finally, he found some from the dawn of his education. I was told it was the finest thing to die for a god, he mumbled. Vorbis said that, and he was stupid. You can die for your country or your people or your family, but for a god you should live fully and busily every day of a long life. And how long is that going to be? We shall see. Brutha looked up at Ohm. You will not show yourself like this again? No, once is enough. Remember the desert. I will remember. Walk with me. Brutha went over to the body of Vorbis and picked it up. I think, he said, they will land on the beach on the Ephebian side of the forts. They won't use the rock shore and they can't use the cliffs. I'll meet them there. He glanced down at Vorbis. Someone should. You can't mean you want to go by yourself. 10,000 won't be sufficient. One might be enough. He walked down the steps. Ern and Simony watched him go. He's going to die, said Simony. He won't even be a patch of grease in the sand. He turned to Ohm. Can you stop him? It may be that I cannot. Brutha was already halfway across the place. Well, we're not deserting him, said Simony. Good. Ohm watched them go too, and then he was alone, except for thousands watching him, crammed around the edges of the great square. He wished he knew what to say to them. That's why he needed people like Brutha. That's why all gods needed people like Brutha. Excuse me, the god looked down. Yes? I can't sell you anything, can I? What is your name? De Blah, god. Ah, yes, and what is it you wish? The merchant hopped anxiously from one foot to the other. You couldn't manage just a small commandment, something about eating yogurt on Wednesday, say? It's always very difficult to shift midweek. You stand before your god and look for business opportunities? Well, said Deblois, we could come to an arrangement, strike while the iron is hot, as the Inquisition say. 20%? How about it? After expenses, of course. The great god Ohm smiled. I think you will make a little profit, Deblois, he said. Right. And that's all I'm looking for. Just trying to make both ends hummus. Tortoises are to be left alone. Deblois put his head to one side. Doesn't sing, does it? He said. But tortoise necklaces, brooches, of course. Tortoiseshell. No! Sorry. See what you meant. All right, tortoise statue. Yes. I thought about the nice shape. Incidentally, you couldn't make statue wobble now and again, could you? Very good for business, wobbling statues. Statue of ossuary wobbles every fast ossuary regular. By means of a small piston device operated in the basement, it is said. But very good for the profits all the same. You make me laugh, little prophet. Sell your tortoises, by all means. Tell you the truth, said Deblois. I've already drawn a few designs just now. Ohm vanished. There was a brief thunderclap. Deblois looked reflectively at his sketches. But I suppose I'll have to take the little figure off them, he said, more or less than to himself. The shade of Vorbis looked around. Ugh, the desert, he said. The black sand was absolutely still under the starlit sky. It looked cold. He hadn't planned on dying yet. In fact, he couldn't quite remember how he died. The desert, he repeated. This time there was a hint of uncertainty. He'd never been uncertain about anything in his life. The feeling was unfamiliar and terrifying. Did ordinary people feel like this? He got a grip on himself. Death was impressed. Very few people managed to hold on to the shape of their old thinking after death. Death found no pleasure in his job. It was an emotion he found hard to grasp, but there was such a thing as satisfaction. So, said Vorbis, this desert, and at the end of the desert, judgment. Yes, of course. Vorbis tried to concentrate. He couldn't. He could feel certainty draining away, and he'd always been certain. He hesitated, like a man opening a door to a familiar room and finding nothing there but a bottomless pit. The memories were still there. He could feel them. They had the right shape. It was just that he couldn't remember what they were. There had been a voice. Surely there had been a voice. But all he could remember was the sound of his own thoughts bouncing off the inside of his own head. Now he had to cross the desert. What could there be to fear? The desert is what you believed. Vorbis looked inside himself and went on looking. He sagged to his knees. I can see that you are busy, said Death. Don't leave me, it's so empty. Death looked around at the endless desert. He snapped his fingers and a large white horse trotted up. I see 100,000 people, he said, swinging himself into the saddle. Where? Here, with you. I can't see them. Death gathered up the reins. Nevertheless, he said, though his horse trotted forward a few steps. I don't understand, screamed Vorbis. Death paused. You have perhaps heard the phrase, he said, that hell is other people? Yes, of course. Death nodded. In time, he said, you will learn that it is wrong. The first boats grounded into the shallows and the troops leapt into shoulder-high surf. No one was quite sure who was leading the fleet. Most of the countries along the coast hated one another, not in any personal sense, but simply on a kind of historical basis. On the other hand, how much leadership was necessary? Everyone knew where Omnia was, and none of the countries in the fleet hated the others worse than they did Omnia. Now it was necessary for it not to exist. General Argovisti of Ephebe considered that he was in charge because, although he didn't have the most ships, he was avenging the attack on Ephebe. But Imperator Bavorius of Sort knew that he was in charge because there were more Sortian ships than any other. and Admiral Ram Ap Khan of Djelibebe, so bad at saying that, knew that he was in charge because he was the kind of person who always thought he was in charge of anything. The only captain who did not, in fact, think that he was commanding the fleet was Fasta Benj, a fisherman from a very small nation of marsh-dwelling nomads whose existence all other countries were in complete ignorance, and whose small reed boat had been in the path of a fleet and had got swept along. Since his tribe believed that there were only 51 people in the world, worshipped a giant newt, spoke a very personal language which no one else understood, and had never seen metal or fire before, he was spending a lot of time wearing a puzzled grin. Clearly, they had reached the shore, not of proper mud and reeds, but of very small gritty bits. He lugged his little reed boat up the sand and sat down with interest to see what the men in the feathery hats and shiny fish scale vests were going to do next. General Argofvisti scanned the beach. They must have seen us coming, he said. So why would they let us establish a beachhead? Heat wavered over the dunes. A dot appeared, growing and contracting in the shimmering air. More troops poured ashore. General Argofvisti shaded his eyes against the sun. Fella's just standing there, he said. Could be a spy, said Borvorius. Don't see how he could be a spy in his own country, said Argofvisti. Anyway, if he was a spy, he'd be creeping around. That's how you can tell. The figure had stopped at the foot of the dunes. There was something about it that drew the eye. Argofvisti had faced many an opposing army, and this was normal. One patiently waiting figure was not. He found he kept turning to look at it. It's carrying something, he said eventually. Sergeant, go and bring that man here. A few minutes later, the sergeant returned. Says he'll meet you in the middle of the beach, sir, he reported. Didn't I tell you to bring him here? He didn't want to come, sir. You've got a sword, haven't you? Yes, sir. Prodded him a bit, but he didn't want to move, sir. And he's carrying a dead body, sir. On a battlefield? It's not bring your own, you know. And, sir? What? Says he's probably the Cenobiarch, sir. Wants to talk about a peace treaty. Oh, he does? Peace treaty? We know about peace treaties with Omnia. Go and tell. No. Take a couple of men and bring him here. Rutha walked back between the soldiers, through the organized pandemonium of the camp. I ought to feel afraid, he thought. I was always afraid in the Citadel, but now? Not now. This is through fear and out the other side. Occasionally, one of the soldiers would give him a push. It's not allowed for an enemy to walk freely into a camp, even if he wants to. He was brought before a trestle table, behind which sat a dozen large men in various military styles, and one small olive-skinned man who was gutting a fish and grinning hopefully at everyone. Well now, said Argofvisti, Cenobiarch of Omnia, eh? Rutha dropped Vorbis's dead body on the sand. Their gaze followed it. I know him, said Borvorius. Vorbis! Someone killed him at last, eh? Will you stop trying to sell me fish? Does anyone know who this man is? He added, indicating Fasta Benj. It was a tortoise, said Rutha. Was it? Not surprised. Never did trust them. Always creeping around. Look, I said no fish. He's not one of mine. I know that. Is he one of yours? Argofvisti waved a hand irritably. Who sent you, boy? No one. I came by myself. But you could say I come from the future. You a philosopher? Where's your sponge? You've come to wage war on Omnia. This would not be a good idea. From Omnia's point of view, yes. From everyone's. You will probably defeat us, but not all of us. And then what will you do? Leave a garrison forever? And eventually a new generation will retaliate. Why you did this won't mean anything to them. You'll be the oppressors. They'll fight. They might even win. Then there'll be another war. And one day people will say, why didn't they sort it all out back then? On the beach, before it all started. Before all those people died. Now we have that chance. Aren't we lucky? Argofvisti stared at him. Then he nudged Borvorius. What did he say? Borvorius, who was better at thinking than the other, said, Are you talking about surrender? Yes, if that's the word. Argofvisti exploded. You can't do that! Someone will have to. Please listen to me. Vorbis is dead. He's paid. Not enough. What about your soldiers? They tried to sack our city. Do your soldiers obey your orders? Certainly. And they'd cut me down here now if you commanded it? I should say so. And I'm unarmed, said Brutha. The sun beat down on an awkward pause. When I say they'd obey, Argivisti began. We were not sent here to parley, said Bovorius abruptly. Vorbus's death changes nothing fundamental. We are here to see that Omnia is no longer a threat. It is not. We will send material and people to help rebuild Ephebe, and gold if you'd like. We will reduce the size of our army, and so on. Consider us beaten. We will even open Omnia to whatever other religions wish to build holy places here. A voice echoed in his head, like the person behind you who says, put the Red Queen on the Black King when you think you've been playing all by yourself. What? This will encourage local effort, said Brutha. Other gods? Here? There will be free trade along the coast. I wish to see Omnia take its place among its fellow nations. I heard you mention other gods. Its place is at the bottom, said Bovorius. No, that won't work. Could we please get back to the matter of other gods? Will you please excuse me for a moment, said Brutha brightly. I need to pray. Even Argivisti raised no objection as Brutha walked off a little way up the beach. As St. Undulant preached to any man who would listen, there were plus points to being a madman. People hesitated to stop you, in case it made things worse. Yes, said Brutha under his breath. I don't seem to recall any discussion about other gods being worshipped in Omnia. Ah, but it'll work for you, said Brutha. People will soon see that the other ones are just no good at all, won't they? He crossed his fingers behind his back. This is religion, boy, not comparison, bloody shopping. You shall not subject your god to market forces. I'm sorry, I can see why you'd be worried about. Worried? Me? By a bunch of primping women and muscle-bound posers and curly beards? Fine. Is that settled then? They won't last 5 minutes. What? And now I better go and talk to these men one more time. His eye was caught by a movement among the dunes. Oh, no, he said, these idiots. He turned and ran desperately towards the beach fleet. No, it's not like that. Listen. But they had seen the army too. It looked impressive, perhaps more impressive than it really was. When news gets through that a huge enemy fleet has beached with the intent of seriously looting, pillaging, and, because they're from civilized countries, whistling and making catcalls at the women and impressing them with their flash bloody uniforms and wooing them away with their flash bloody consumer goods, I don't know, show them a polished bronze mirror and it goes right to their heads. You think there was something wrong with the local lads. Then people either head for the hills or pick up some handy, swingable objects, get Granny to hide the family treasures in her drawers and prepare to make a fight of it. And in the lead, the iron cart. Steam poured out of its funnel. Ern must have got it working again. Stupid! Brutha shouted to the world in general and carried on running. The fleet was already forming battle lines, and its commander, whichever he was amazed to see an apparent attack by one man. Bovorius caught him as he plunged towards a line of spears. I see, he said. Keep us talking while your soldiers got into a position, eh? No, I didn't want that. Bovorius' eyes narrowed. He had not survived the many wars of life by being a stupid man. No, he said. Maybe you didn't, but it doesn't matter. Listen to me, my innocent little priest. Sometimes there has to be a war. Things go too far for words. There's other forces. Now, go back to your people. Maybe we'll both be alive when this is over, and then we can talk. Fight first, talk after. That's how it works, boy. That's history. Now go back. Brutha turned away. Shall I smite them? No! I could make them as dust. Just say the word. No, that's worse than war. But you said a god must protect his people. What would we be if I told you to crush honest men? Not stuck full of arrows? No. The Omnians were assembling among the dunes. A lot of them had clustered around the iron-shielded cart. Brutha looked at it through a mist of despair. Didn't I say I'd go down there alone, he said. Simony, who was leaning against the turtle, gave him a grim smile. Did it work, he said. I think it didn't. I knew it. Sorry you had to find out. Things have a way of wanting to happen, see? Sometimes you get people facing off and that's it. But only if people would... Yeah, you could use that as a commandment. And there was a clanging noise and a hatch opened on the side of the turtle. Ern emerged backward holding a spanner. What is this thing? It's a machine for fighting, said Simony. The turtle moves, eh? For fighting Ephebians? Ern turned around. What? He said. You built this thing to fight Ephebians? Oh, well, no, said Ern, looking bewildered. We're fighting Ephebians? Everyone, said Simony. But I never. Rutha looked at the spiked wheels he saw at edge plates around the edge of the turtle. It's a device that goes by itself, said Ern. We were going to use it for... look, I never wanted it to... We need it now, said Simony. Which we? What comes out of the big, long spout thing at the front, said Brutha. Steam, said Ern dully. It's connected to the safety valve. Oh. It comes out very hot, said Ern, sagging even more. Oh? Scalding, in fact. Brutha's gaze drifted from the steam funnel to the rotating knives. Very philosophical, he said. We were going to use it against Vorbis, said Ern. And now you're not. It's not going to be used against Ephebians. You know, I used to think I was stupid. Then I met philosophers. Simony broke the silence by patting Brutha on the shoulder. It'll all work out, he said. We won't lose. After all, he smiled encouragingly. We have God on our side. Brutha turned. His fist shot out. It wasn't a scientific blow, but it was hard enough to spin Simony around. He clutched his chin. What was that for? Isn't this what you wanted? We get the gods we deserve, said Brutha, and I think we don't deserve any. Stupid. The sanest man I've met in this year lives up a pole in the desert. Stupid. I think I ought to join him. Why? Gods and men and gods, said Brutha. Everything happens because things have happened before. Stupid. But you are the chosen one. Choose someone else. Brutha strode off through the ragged army. No one tried to stop him. He reached the path that led up to the cliffs and did not even turn around to look at the battle lines. Aren't you going to watch the battle? I need someone to watch the battle. Didactylos was sitting on a rock, his hands folded on his stick. Oh, hello, said Brutha bitterly. Welcome to Omnia. It helps if you're philosophical about it, said Didactylos. But there's no reason to fight. Yes, there is. Honor and revenge and duty and things like that. Do you really think so? I thought philosophers were supposed to be logical. Didactylos shrugged. Well, the way I see it, logic is only a way of being ignorant by numbers. I thought it would all be over when Vorbis was dead. Didactylos stared into his inner world. It takes a long time for people like Vorbis to die. They leave echoes in history. I know what you mean. How's Ern's steam machine, said Didactylos. I think he's a bit upset about it, said Brutha. Didactylos cackled and banged his stick on the ground. Nah, he's learning. Everything works both ways. It should do, said Brutha. Something like a golden comet sped across the sky of the Discworld. Alm soared like an eagle, buoyed up by the freshness, by the strength of the belief. For as long as it lasted anyway, belief this hot, this desperate never lasted long. Human minds could not sustain it, but while it did last, he was strong. The central spire of the Cori Celesti rises up from the mountains. At the hub, 10 vertical miles of green ice and snow, topped by the turrets and domes of Dun Manifestin. There, the gods of the Discworld live. At least, any god who is anybody. And it is strange that, although it takes years of effort and work and scheming for a god to get there, once there, they never seem to do a lot apart from drink too much and indulge in a little mild corruption. Many systems of government follow the same broad lines. They play games. They tend to be very simple games because gods are easily bored by complicated things. It is strange that, while small gods can have one aim in mind for millions of years, are in fact one aim, large gods seem to have the attention span of the common mosquito. And style? If the gods of the Discworld were people, they would think that 3 plastered ducks is a bit avant-garde. There was a double door at the end of the main hall. It rocked to a thunderous knocking. The gods looked up vaguely from their various preoccupations and shrugged and turned away. The doors burst inward. Ohm strode in through the debris, looking around with the air of one who has a search to complete and not a lot of time to do it in. Right, he said. Io, god of thunder, looked up from his throne and waved his hammer threateningly. Who are you? Ohm strode towards the throne, picked up Io by his toga, and gave a quick jab with his forehead. Hardly anyone really believes in thunder gods anymore. Ow! Listen, friend, I've got no time for talking to some panty waster in a sheet. Where's the god of Thebes and its sword? Aya, clutching his nose, waved vaguely towards the center of the hall. You didn't have to do that, he said reproachfully. Alm strode across the hall. In the center of the room was what at first looked like a round table, and then looked like a model of the Discworld, turtle, elephants, and all, and then some undefinable way looks like the real Discworld, seen from far off yet brought up close to. There was something subtly wrong about the distances, a feeling of vast space curled up small, but possibly the real Discworld wasn't covered with a network of glowing lines hovering just above the surface, or perhaps miles above the surface. Alm hadn't seen this before, but he knew what it was. Both a wave and a particle, both a map and the dome on top of the tiny Cori Celesti. He would undoubtedly see himself, looking down on an even smaller model, and so on, down to the point where the universe coiled up like the tail of an ammonite, the kind of creature that lived millions of years ago and never believed in any gods at all. The gods clustered around it, watching intently. Elbowed aside a minor goddess of plenty. There were dice floating just above the world, and a mess of little clay figures and gaming counters. You didn't need to be even slightly omnipotent to know what was going on. He hit my nose! Turned around. I never forget a face, friend. Just take yours away, right? While you still have some left. He turned back to the game. Excuse me, said a voice by his waist. He looked down at a very large newt. Yes? You're not supposed to do that here. No smiting. Not up here. It's the rules. You want to fight, you get your humans to fight his humans. Who are you? Patang, me. You're a god? Definite. Yeah? How many worshippers you got? 51. The newt looked at him hopefully and added, Is that lots? I can't count. It pointed at a rather crudely molded figure on the beach in Omni and said, But got a steak. Looked at the figure of the little fisherman. When he dies, you'll have 50 worshippers, he said. Is that more or less than 51? A lot less. Definite? Yes. No one tell me that. There were several dozen gods watching the beach. Vaguely remembered the Ephesian statues. There was the goddess with the badly carved owl. Yes. Rubbed his head. This wasn't godlike thinking. It seemed simpler when you were up here. It was all a game. You forgot that it wasn't a game down there. People died, bits got chopped off. We're like eagles up here, he thought. Sometimes we show a tortoise how to fly. Then we let go. He said to the occult world in general, There's people gonna die down there. A Sordian god of the sun did not even bother to look around. That's what they're there for, he said. In his hand, he was holding a dice box that looked very much like a human skull with rubies in the eye sockets. Ah, yes, said Forgot that for a moment. He looked at the skull and then turned to the little goddess of plenty. What's this, love? A cornucopia? Can I have a look? Thanks. Emptied some of the fruit out. Then he nudged the newt god. If I was you, friend, I'd find something long and hefty, he said. Is one less than 51? Said Patang. It's the same, said firmly. He eyed the back of the Sordian god's head. But you have thousands, said the newt god. You fight for thousands. Rubbed his forehead. Spent too long down there, he thought. Can't stop thinking about at ground level. I think, he said. I think if you want thousands, you have to fight for one. He tapped the solar god on the shoulder. Hey, sunshine? When the god looked around, broke the cornucopia over his head. It wasn't a normal thunderclap. It stuttered like the shyness of supernovas, a great ripping billows of sound that tore the sky. Sand fountained up and whirled across the recumbent bodies lying face down on the beach. Lightning stabbed down, and sympathetic fire leapt from spear tip to sword point. Simony looked up at the booming darkness. What the hell's happening? He nudged the body next to him. It was Argavisti. They stared at one another. More thunder smashed across the sky. Waves climbed up one another to rip into the fleet. Hull drifted with awful grace into hull, giving the baseline of the thunder a counterpoint of groaning wood. A broken spar thudded into the sand by Simony's head. We're dead if we stay here, he said. Come on. They staggered through the spray and sand amidst the groups of cowering and praying soldiers, fetching up something hard, half-covered. They crawled into the calm under the turtle. Other people had already had the same idea. Shadowy figures sat or sprawled in the darkness. Ern sat dejectedly on his toolbox. There was a hint of gutted fish. Gods are angry, said Borvorius. Bloody furious, said Argovisti. I'm not that happy myself, said Simony. Gods? Huh. This is no time for impiety, said Ram-Ab-Ifan. There's a shower of grapes outside. Can't think of a better one, said Simony. A piece of cornucopia shrapnel bounced off the roof of the turtle, which rocked it on its spike wheels. Why be angry with us, said Argovisti. We're doing what they want. Borvorius tried to smile. Gods, he said. Can't live with them, can't live without them. Someone nudged Simony and passed him a soggy cigarette. It was a Sordian soldier. Despite himself, he took a puff. It's good tobacco, he said. Stuff we grow tastes like camel's droppings. He passed it along to the next hunched figure. Thank you. Borvorius produced a flask from somewhere. You go to hell if you'd have a drop of spirit, he said. So it seems, said Simon absently. Then he noticed the flask. Oh, you mean alcohol? Probably, but who cares? I won't be able to get near the fire for priests. Thanks. Pass it around. Thank you. The turtle rocked to a thunderbolt. Bo? They all looked at the pieces of raw fish and Fosta Benj's hopeful expression. I could rake some of the coals out of the firebox from here, said Ern after a while. Someone tapped Simony on the shoulder, creating a strange tingling sensation. Thank you. I have to go. As he took it, he was aware of the rush of air, a sudden breath in the universe. He looked around in time to see a wave lift a ship out of the water and smash it against the dunes. A distant scream colored the wind. The soldiers stared. There were people under there, said Argovisti. Simony dropped the flask. Come on, he said. And no one, as they hauled on timbers in the teeth of the gale, as Ern applied everything he knew about levers, as they used their helmets to shovels to dig under the wreckage, asked who it was they were digging for, or what kind of uniform they'd been wearing. Fog rolled in on the wind, hot and flashing with electricity, and still the sea pounded down. Simony hauled on a spar and then found the weight lessens as someone grasped the other end. He looked up into Brutha's eyes. Don't say anything, said Brutha. Gods are doing this to us. Don't say anything. I've got to know. It's better than us doing this to us, isn't it? No one ever said it was going to be... Oh, yeah. There's still people who never got off the ships. No one ever said it was going to be nice. Simony pulled aside some planking. There was a man there, armor and leather so stand as to be unrecognizable, but alive. Listen, said Simony as the wind whipped at him. I'm not giving in. You haven't won. I'm not doing this for any sort of god, whether they exist or not. I'm not doing it for other people. And stop smiling like that. A couple of dice dropped in the sand. They sparkled and crackled for a while and then evaporated. The sea calmed. The fog went ragged and curled into nothingness. There was a still haze in the air, but the sun was at least visible again, if only as a brighter area in the dome of the sky. Once again, there was the sensation of the universe drawing breath. The gods appeared, transparent and shimmering, in and out of focus. The sun glinted off a hint of golden curls and wings and lyres. When they spoke in unison, their voices drifting ahead or trailing behind the others, as always happens when a group of people are trying to faithfully repeat something they've been told to say. Olm was in the throng, standing right behind the Sordian god of thunder with a faraway expression on his face. It was noticeable, if only to Brutha, that the thunder god's right arm disappeared up behind his own back in a way that, if such a thing could be imagined, would suggest that someone was twisting it to the edge of pain. What the god said was heard by each combatant in his own language and according to his own understanding. It boiled down to, this is not a game. Here and now, you are alive. And then, it was over. You'd make a good bishop, said Brutha. Me, said Didactylos. I'm a philosopher. Good, it's about time we had one. And an Ephebian. Good, you can think up a better way of ruling the country. Priests shouldn't do it. They can't think about it properly. Nor can soldiers. Thank you, said Simony. They were sitting in the Cenobiarch's garden. Far overhead, an eagle circled, looking for anything that wasn't a tortoise. I like the idea of democracy. You have to have everyone distrusts. said Brutha. That way everyone's happy. Think about it, Simony. Yes? I'm making you the head of the Quisition. What? I want it stopped, and I want it stopped the hard way. You want me to kill all the Inquisitors, right? No, that's the easy way. I want as few deaths as possible. Those who enjoyed it, perhaps, but only those. Now, where's Ern? The moving turtle was still on the beach, wheels buried in the sand blown about by the storm. Ern had been too embarrassed to try to unearth it. The last I saw, he was tinkering with the door mechanism, said Didactylos. Never happier than when he's tinkering with things. Yes, we shall have to find things to keep him occupied. Irrigation, architecture, that sort of thing. What are you going to do? Said Simony. I've got a copy out of the library, said Brutha. But you can't read and write, said Didactylos. No, but I can see and draw. 2 copies, one to keep here. Plenty of room when we burn the septuage, said Simony. No burning of anything. You have to take a step at a time, said Brutha. He looked out at the shimmering line of the desert. Funny, he'd been as happy as he'd ever been in the desert. And then, he began. Yes? Brutha lowered his eyes to the farmlands and villages around the citadel. He sighed. And then we'd better get on with things, he said. Every day. Fasta Benj rode home in a thoughtful frame of mind. It had been a very good few days. He met a lot of new people and sold quite a lot of fish. Patang with his lesser servants had talked personally to him, making him promise not to wage war on some place he'd never heard of. He'd agreed. Fasta Benji's people had no word for war, since they had no one to fight, and life was quite tough enough as it was. Patang's words arrived as, remember when Pacha Maj hit his uncle with a big rock? Like that, only more worse. Some of the new people had shown him this amazing way of making lightning. You hit this rock with this piece of hard stuff, and you got the bits of lightning which dropped onto dry stuff, which got red and hot like the sun. If you put more wood on it, it got bigger, and if you put fish on it, it got black, but if you were quick, it didn't get black, but got brown, and tasted better than anything you'd ever tasted, although this was not difficult. And he'd been given some knives not made out of rock and cloth, and not made out of reeds, and all in all, life was looking up for Fasta Benj and his people. He wasn't sure why lots of people would want to hit Pachamoj's uncle with a big rock, but it definitely escalated the pace of technological process. No one, not even Brutha, noticed that old Lutzi wasn't around anymore. Not being noticed, either as being present or absent, is a part of history, a part of a history amongst stock and trade. In fact, he'd packed his broom in his bonsai mountains and had gone by secret tunnels and devious means to the hidden valley in the central peaks, where the abbot was waiting for him. The abbot was playing chess in the long gallery that overlooked the valley. Fountains bubbled in the gardens, and swallows flew in and out of the windows. All went well, said the abbot without looking up. Very well, Lord, said Lutzi. I had to nudge things a little, though. I wish you wouldn't do that sort of thing, said the abbot, fingering his pawn. You'll overstep on the mark one day. It's the history we've got these days, said Lutzi. Very shoddy stuff, Lord. I have to patch it up all the time. Yes. Used to get much better history in the old days. Things were always better than they are now. It's the nature of things. Yes, Lord. Lord? The abbot looked up in mild exasperation. You know the books that say Brutha died and there's a century of terrible warfare? You know my eyesight isn't what it was, Lutzi. Well, it's not entirely like that now. Just as long as it all turns out all right in the end, said the abbot. Yes, Lord, said the history monk. There, a few weeks before your next assignment, why don't you have a little rest? Thank you, Lord. Thought I might go down to the forest and watch a few falling trees. Good practice. Mind always on the job, eh? As Lutzi left, the abbot glanced up at his opponent. Good man, that, he said. Your move. The opponent looked hard and long at the board. The abbot waited to see what the long-term devious strategies were being evolved. Then his opponent tapped a piece with a bony finger. Remind me again, he said, how the little horse-shaped one moves. Eventually, Brutha died in unusual circumstances. He had reached a great age, but this, at least, was not unusual in the church. As he said, you had to keep busy every day. He rose at dawn and wandered over the window. He liked to watch the sunrise. They hadn't got around to replacing the temple doors. Apart from anything else, even Ern hadn't been able to think of a way of removing the weirdly contorted heap of molten metal, so they just built steps over them. And after a year or two, people had quite accepted it and said it was probably a symbol. Not of anything exactly, but still a symbol. Definitely symbolic. But the sun did shine off the copper dome of the library. Ruth had made a mental note to inquire about the progress of the new wing. There were too many complaints about overcrowding these days. People came from everywhere to visit the library. It was the biggest non-magical library in the world. Half the philosophers of Ephebe seemed to live there now, and Omnia was even producing one or two of its own. And even priests were coming to spend time in it because of the collection of religious books. There were 1,283 religious books in there now, each one, according to itself, the only book any man need ever read. It was sort of nice to see them all together. As Didactylos used to say, you had to laugh. It was while Brutha was eating his breakfast that the subdeacon, whose job it was to read him his appointments for the day and tactfully make sure he wasn't wearing his underpants on the outside, shyly offered him congratulations. Said Brutha, his gruel dripping off the spoon. 100 years, said the subdeacon, since you walked in the desert, sir. Really? I thought it was 50 years. Can't be more than 60 years, boy. 100 years, Lord. We had a look in the records. Really? 100 years. 100 years' time. Brutha laid down his spoon very carefully and stared at the plain white wall opposing to him. The subdeacon found himself turning to see what the Cenobiarch was looking at, but there was nothing, only the whiteness on the wall. 100 years, mused Brutha. Good Lord, I forgot. He laughed. I forgot! 100 years, eh? But here and now, the subdeacon looked around. Cenobiarch? He stepped closer, the blood draining from his face. Lord? He turned and ran for help. Brutha's body tumbled forward almost gracefully, smacking into the table. The bowl overturned and the gruel dripped down onto the floor. And then Brutha stood up, without a second glance at his corpse. I wasn't expecting you, he said. Death stopped, leaning against the wall. How fortunate you were. But there's still a lot to be done. Yes, there always is. Brutha followed the gaunt figure through the wall where, instead of the privy that occupied the far side in normal space, there was black sand. The light was brilliant, crystalline, in a black sky filled with stars. There really is a desert. Does everyone get this? Said Brutha. Who knows? And what's at the end of the desert? Judgment. Brutha considered this. Which end? Death grinned and stepped aside. What Brutha had thought was a rock in the sand was a hunched figure, sitting clutching its knees. It looked paralyzed with fear. He stared. Vorbis? He said. He looked at Death. But Vorbis died 100 years ago. Yes. He had to walk it all alone with himself, if he dared. He's been there for 100 years. Possibly not. Time is different here. It is more personal. You mean 100 years can pass like a few seconds? 100 years can pass like infinity. The black-on-black eye stared imploringly at Brutha, who reached out automatically without thinking, and then hesitated. He was a murderer, said Death, and a creator of murderers, a torturer without passion, cruel, callous, compassionless. Yes, I know, he's Vorbis, said Brutha. Vorbis changed people. Sometimes he changed them into dead people, but he always changed them. That was his triumph. He sighed. But I'm me, he said. Vorbis stood up uncertainly and followed Brutha across the desert. Death watched them walk away. And that, my friends, is the end of Small Gods. We made it through. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming along through this journey by this amazing book by Terry Pratchett. It is one of my favorites. I will say Reaper Man is probably still my absolute favorite Discworld book from Terry Pratchett, but this one is just very, very good because I am not a religious person at all, but a lot of things in this book just make sense. And I'm just like, man, wow, that's kind of a really crazy way to think about it. But yeah, once again, you guys are fantastic. Thank you so much for the support and the positive comments and everything as we went through this. Like I said, we will start on the next book fairly soon. I will put the poll in the description of this video as well. And then within like the next week or so, I'll start reading the other book that I have up on there, whichever one wins. So yeah, thank you once again, and I will catch you guys on the next book.